So this is WoW, and the war within is bloated. Is there indeed too much going on in modern WoW? Let me see. Let me see.
Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. I'm a little cold, but I wanted to talk about how WoW has been getting
Yeah.
so bloated, and
Yeah.
how I'm honestly
That's just a little blankie on. It's cozy.
kind of worried that the war within is continuing on with that trend. One of the biggest things that we saw with Oracle Priest just last week was how the spec is having
We need to take a look at Colossus Warrior too, don't we?
to juggle between buffs to be able to deliver the proper buffs onto the players when you need them, and it adds another element of like cognitive load to be able to play the spec, and it's really not the only one that's happening alongside of it. And there's been a lot of discussion throughout the community, and I wanted to kind of go over a couple of clips from what other creators have been saying about how WoW has just gotten very bloated over the years.
We definitely were fighting a resto shaman the other night who was able to knock me back like 3 different times and keep me rooted the whole game and stun the whole game. That felt like a lot of ability bloat in that exact moment in particular, so go on.
Skill ceiling of World of Warcraft used to be pretty low compared to other games. To do the most amount of damage with any given class is not rocket science, right? But the more they add of these kind of support classes, the higher the skill ceiling is when you combine it with like a raid group. Because nowadays it's actually incredibly hard to fully, like, to get the full amount of damage you can gain from a full raid group is actually really hard. Like,
I think she's talking about like to maximize the group's damage while making sure everybody else is doing everything right.
And we also saw it with M+ when Ogavoker was really coming into it, but it's also that WoW is so built on like a variety of modifiers and like multiplicative buffs on top of each other, where you were having the world first race with like Og officers, where they would specifically sit down outside of the raid group just looking at logs the entire time to like min-max their damage. You would have obviously the PI combos with like Og buffs that we had in like season 2, which
So I think this is going to be a PvE focused video, right?
has been obviously toned down a lot, but it's also just added to this bloat to the game where both like add-ons and the support specs have kind of like combined to add this like really large barrier of entry to be able to even play the game. And Asvin was also talking about this recently, where there's a couple clips I want to show talking about how, yeah, WoW is like really sweaty, and it's gotten sweatier and sweatier over the years as they've made things harder. But add-ons, and I would honestly say most of it comes to the complexity of the specs in the game, which almost like requires the add-ons to be able to properly leverage. That has also added this element to the equation, which is increasingly just not friendly to new players.
I feel like I see a lot of people on my videos in particular, like asking me about like my UI, and they really like it, and it makes me wonder, like I don't think my UI is that fancy compared to some, but it does make me wonder what it would be like to be a new player in WoW and having all the sort of freedom to mess with your UI, and sort of like seeing what you have as like the base UI, and then watching like streamers or content creators or, you know, whatever, with like all these weakauras tracking everybody's globals and stuff. I don't know. Actually kind of insane, huh?
Do you guys think these are going to be cool, these hero specs? Because, like, I think they could be cool, but my concern is that I think that if Blizzard tries to make them cool, it won't be balanced. And retail WoW is for a bunch of, like, try-hard nerds. Like, that's what retail WoW is all about.
Okay, so speaking as one of the like try-hard nerds,
Maybe.
I see what he's saying, but like also a little bit later in the video, he also talks about how like you don't want to invite anybody who's gonna like make your life harder. It's like, yeah, you do want to min-max, but like what else is there for like endgame, you know?
I think the hero specs could actually be pretty dang cool. From what I've seen, at least the ones that I've seen from Warrior, it doesn't look like it's adding a whole bunch of extra stuff in terms of stuff that you have to do. It looks like it's more like giving you options to change how the stuff that you do works, which is pretty cool. But then if Warrior is sort of just not getting all the stuff that other classes are getting, then it's kind of a problem. I feel like that's maybe when one of the things happens with Warriors anyway.
You want to make sure you're pushing the hardest progression possible, or pushing with your friends and accomplishing the dungeon, and then it's not fun when someone kind of ruins the experience, even, you know, even if it's an honest mistake or they just didn't have the experience. Like, yeah, if you don't complete the dungeon in time, it's not that fun. And
allowing some.
So another thing, is it bad to have like a skill cap in the game? Like, is it bad to have classes that are more complex that reward like gameplay? I don't know about that idea.
Some people to put in partial effort and other people not to put in partial effort. Well, then you create a reward structure around putting in partial effort, and the people that are putting in full effort leave. So that's what happens.
like every raid guild ever.
You discriminate on rats? I discriminate on anybody that doesn't put in, like, if you're not enchanting your gear, if you're not performing well. If I know you, obviously I'm going to give you special treatment because that's just the way it is. But otherwise, no, I absolutely discriminate. Like, if somebody is not like fully ready, or they're not like enchanted, or I don't feel like they're prepared, then yeah, fuck them.
So it really boils down to, like, everyone is going to end up being sweatier in these games, whether it's going to be like people doing the Season of Discovery, like pre-leveling tactics, which I think got nerfed, or whether it's retail players mapping out and you're using add-ons to figure out the best leveling route, or people figuring out the best way to farm seeds and Emir Drasil so they can get their infinite augment rune, so they can always have an augment rune, and that's their like min-max grind. Like, I don't know, there's always going to be this sweatiness in World of Warcraft. There's always gonna be sweatiness in like pretty much every game you ever play these days. Like,
I think you just want to create a system where people have an entry point that's not too high, and then you can continue to put in effort and learn the game, get good at the game, customize, you know, your UI, if that's what we're talking about, to the point where you like it. And the more that you can put into the game and continue to like learn and get better and see, you know, like an improved result from what you're doing, that's a good thing. But maybe if the floor is still too high, that could be risky. But I don't know if I don't think WoW is necessarily there. And there are games that are like that, with like PoE is pretty complex, but that's like a special thing about the game that people like, and it's a game that you can then put a lot of time and effort into. And I don't think that WoW is quite there yet, but we'll see with the talents, right? We'll see what they're saying.
that was actually kind of the problem I had with New World, was that I felt like super behind when I was trying to do like a new player experience when I first started playing that in like beta. Was like everybody already had it figured out, and I felt like I was behind. But WoW also has the additional problem that yeah, people are inevitably going to be sweaty, but when there's so much bloat to the game, when I would argue that Dragonflight talents contributed more to bloat. I think Asmund, one of the clips that we have, he kind of talks about it, how they've scaled it back because...
But that's what people wanted, man. They didn't like having like 3 talents to pick from in like the row, right? They wanted to go back to the old style where you pick talents in a tree and it goes down, and even if it's essentially the same decision that you're making, whether picking a build, people like that more, and now they're like, oh, it's too much. It's actually kind of crazy.
Because they didn't have covenants, but I actually think they kind of made it worse in Dragonflight, especially for healers, because there was so much power creep. And I really think that the hero talents, Oracle in particular, are adding on to this power creep in a really big way that ups the
that ain't my browser, Barndoor.
And even some of the like
using all his RAM.
What's up, man? Or slightly positive reviews that we've seen for some of the hero talents from other classes or specs, it still adds another element of like bloat
that
comes into the equation as well.
To me, like, I feel like I can't get into the game because there's so many things that are in the game. Like, there's just so much to it. And I've never really, I don't feel that way with Lost Ark. I don't feel that way with Final Fantasy. I don't feel that way with New World.
It's because you've been playing those games,
WoW
Asmund.
Just has like all of these extra like verticals of difficulty that like no other game has.
A shadow pie.
And WoW is the best game of all time. I mean, what do you want? I feel like I understand. I think there's things that happen with Asmund and WoW that are not just the game is like this. I feel like he hasn't been playing very much WoW, so it can be overwhelming to him because a lot goes into WoW, and he has played WoW in a way that a lot of people have not, where he's like really tried to raid hard and has done everything in the game, and getting back to that level of understanding when you're so far out of it probably does seem overwhelming. But that's not where it starts necessarily, right?
And just not even difficulty, like complexity.
And I think this complexity that he starts talking about, and we'll have another clip as well, really comes down to when you're trying to stack all these modifiers together, like Nagura was talking about in her clip. It comes down to how you're balancing out each of these individual Dragonflight talents, which is somehow interacting with some of your larger cooldowns and stacking Shadowlands legendaries, Covenant abilities, old legendaries, even some like essence effects. All of these things sort of stacking together for like a new player experience. And so you don't want to just like have the game be dumbed down in its entirety, but every expansion adding something else onto the equation inevitably has this infinite sort of power creep to it.
Right, but then people get all bent out of shape about the idea of borrowed power, as if there is something that you get to play around with for an expansion that doesn't stick with you. Then you start to have fussing about borrowed power, right? And what borrowed power allows you to do is have cool mechanics to play with for an expansion or a patch that does not necessarily have to become part of your core class. But a lot of the things that were cool kind of did stick around. But people will fuss about that thing too.
And that was actually some of the reason after MOP, really, that they started doing some like the class pruning, which
You have to do that eventually.
had a really like negative effect in the community, where they were really tired of like losing buttons and really tired of like losing extra abilities. But now we're kind of beginning this cycle again, where people are looking at having too many keybinds. And one of the biggest things when it comes to a new...
What WoW needs to do is do what they believe in, make the game, and then people will fuss about whatever they decide to fuss about. But take feedback and stuff too. But I think that to some extent people are always going to fuss. Doesn't mean that you can't take the feedback, but you do need to understand, like, you got to do what you got to do. So I understand the pruning had to happen so they could build from it. But yeah, I don't know. It's tricky, man.
Expansion is they always want to bring something new
Legion
to the
was cool, though,
equation.
yeah.
They always want to add something new to the equation, and I understand that, and it makes sense when you're trying to sell new expansions that you want some reason for people to come back. But then it always seems to boil down to another way that classes get like more deeply complex. Now, Final Fantasy, on the other hand, I haven't played it like super crazy in depth for multiple expansions.
played it at all.
Wow, but I
Not
was
really.
playing it for
Not in-game.
Shadowbringers into Endwalker, and one of the things I really liked about it was that there were some slight reworks to how the spec was. When I was playing a lot of Astrologian, and then obviously I played a little bit of Sage, a little bit of White Mage, but there weren't these like full additional abilities or full like fledged massive amounts of bloat. Like I think going into Endwalker, we got like a new raid cooldown or something like that, but it was like one extra keybind maybe that was getting added into the equation.
Would that be enough? Would that be enough to go into a new expansion of WoW and get one new raid cooldown? I feel like I would be a little bit disappointed unless there was some sort of big borrowed power system that you then got to interact with that made something different. I don't think I would like that. I think that wouldn't be enough. I think I get excited to see what new talents and abilities you get every expansion.
And then they were simplifying
Oh, no.
how you were like drawing cards and cycling cards or something along those lines. And as a result, they weren't just adding lots of new things on top of each other that you had to be able to juggle around, but it was more so like cleaning things up. And one of the ways a lot of people in the community were really hoping that a lot of these hero talents would actually go would be that they'd be more along the side of cosmetics for class skins. Kind of the way that people were hoping that Shadowlands Covenants were going to be more cosmetic and less about a variety of different ways of building up power.
I like them games. I am realizing more and more over time that the specific things that I like in video games are not necessarily what everybody likes. I like to have ways of increasing my character's power, and I think it's fun when you have to sort of interact with those different systems. Now, some of it is like, again, like it comes a time it's like, okay, that's a little too much, being able to knock me all over the map 13 different kind of ways and root me and stun me, like we were experiencing with our Resto Shaman game the other day. But it's like, if I go to a new expansion and all I get is like new transmog, that's not good enough for me. I don't know. That might be different than what most people like, but I understand. I like grindy progression PvP. That's what I like.
Blizzard doesn't understand after the failures of the past of player power connected systems. It's constant half measures instead of giving players what they're asking for.
Because if you were having things that were going to be more cosmetic, or they were going to be more about your choice, or like how things are going to be appearing, and they're going to be appearing really cool, but it's not going to add some like extra level of complexity to the equation, then you're able to look a little bit cooler without having to go through, you know, Oracle Priest, which is having all these additional add-ons on hand to be able to track the buffs, or weakauras to be able to track which buff that you're cycling between and deliver it to the right target. Or in the case of the Keeper of the Grove setup, you're having to adjust your spellcasting sequence as a Resto Druid to be able to properly balance out a number of buffs that you have on hand that you previously did not have to worry about before. And then it was just coming down to cosmetics. Because when it's always coming down to this player...
I don't know, man. I feel like having a different way to play your class that's cool and effective is way better than just looking different, personally. I don't know, man. Disable add-ons. Well, hold on now. Now I'm getting too crazy now. Yeah, that's so weird. Is that what most people like? They just want to look different? I don't know. I don't think that's how I feel at all.
Player power equation, it's always going to add another layer of complexity on hand to be able to deal with the content. And keep in mind that the content's also getting harder, and historically has been getting harder over time. I think
that's an important thing. Can you imagine what people would say if you didn't get that? Because people might complain that things are getting complicated, but people are like, there's no content. I don't know, man. I don't think that, like, as someone who does still take feedback from the community, you have to create what you want to create. I know a video game is not necessarily the same thing as art, but it is kind of art. You have to create in a way that you are doing what you want to do. You are doing what you want to put out into the world. And I want, as a content creator, to create content that you guys like, but at the same time, if you are always just trying to do what someone else says they want you to do, I think you're gonna lose the soul of it. And so I don't know this idea. I don't know about all this, bro. I'm talking a lot about what people want in the community. I don't know, bro. You guys actually absolutely are art. I agree with that. And so, like any art, you have to create something that you feel good about, that you feel passionate about. And I think that this kind of always just trying to do whatever the community says they want is risky. Now, in the case of classic and being like, you know, the community wants it and they're like, I'm not so sure you do. It's like, no, we do. But then they do it and it's awesome. But for this kind of thing, I don't know, bro. I don't know.
Sepulchre was obviously a huge step up that we had in difficulty. They kind of brought it back down for Vault of the Incarnates. It got a bit harder in Aberrus. And then, of course, it capped off with the equation here in Emirjasil, where that is sort of the natural sort of life expectancy that you're going to see for a lot of expansions, where, yeah, you're going to have each raid tier sort of step up in difficulty, and then it kind of resets a little bit, and then it keeps going up and up and up. But one of the biggest things is that the trend always ends up going higher over time, and that's where having the content getting more difficult over time, and then classes getting more difficult over time, makes it a lot more difficult to bring new people into the equation. Now, Asmon in this video said a lot about like making sure you just get rid of add-ons in its entirety. I don't really agree with that, but there's certainly
it's like, hold on now, whoa.
I do agree with.
Whoa.
It happens in the class trees. It happens in the spec trees as they get more bloated. And I really think that a lot of these hero talents are just adding on to the bloat. And eventually, I think what's actually going to happen with these hero talents, if not in beta, then certainly over the course of the War Within's life, is they're probably going to get less and less important to operating your spec and become more and more about the flavor and more about the cosmetics, which is something that players are early on really calling for. Just
not me. So that's what this video is talking about. Is the main issue of Dragonflight is we have too many spells, maybe it's too casual, right? So that's an important piece of feedback, though, right? Because you want players who are casual and like new to the game to be able to hop in and like get their like, you know, bearings and then be able to build from there, right? That's the idea. Is it getting too much?
Shadowlands Covenants to be swappable all the time. It feels like we're kind of repeating that cycle once more.
Yeah, I think that people are right to complain about it, but I think that the real problem with WoW is like just on a fundamental level, the way that the game is designed. Like the game is designed in a way that is built completely around optimization and min-maxing. And that's happened because you have 15 years of optimization and min-maxing.
Right.
And like
that's what I'm thinking. Is like people have just been playing it for a long time. Like I think that, you know, if you play a game forever and ever, and it's a game that allows you to get better and faster at clearing content or whatever, and rewards you for doing that, you want to get better at it, right? And so people who've been playing forever, they're trying to tighten it up, man. They're trying to get their min-max on. You want to get better at stuff, and that there is absolutely that tendency to lean towards figuring out how to be better at whatever you're putting your time into. At least that's what I do. I try to get better things that I'm doing.
Like in classic WoW, it's not as bad. It's still there, but it's not as pronounced. It's not as important.
That's the thing is, I think it is.
Hold on.
As pronounced. And like in classic WoW, it's not as bad. It's still there.
Is he talking about the giga optimization stuff?
And that's happened because you have 15 years of.
No, I think people take classic extra super serious. Like they're doing their MC speed runs and all this stuff. No, I don't know about that, bro. I think that modern WoW like raiders and stuff and like the real top end guilds are like pretty intense, but I think there's like people who think they're that intense playing in classic for sure. Like they're like doing like gatekeeping for level 25 for level 40 dungeons
of optimization.
I don't know, man.
min-maxing.
I think classic players take
And, like,
themselves
in
super
classic
serious
WoW,
sometimes.
It's not as bad.
I
It's
don't know
still
about that.
there, but it's
Yeah.
not as pronounced. It's
I
not
don't
as
know, bro.
important.
That's the thing is, I think it is still going to be very
It's not as important, but I'm not convinced that people don't think it's that important. I think people get real serious.
very pronounced regardless of what happens, but Blizzard, of course, has the option of how they want to set aside like their baseline, because the more that you add into the equation to min-max, the more that you're going to have this like vast gap between players. The more that you're going to have players who are going to be separated by having add-ons and being able to interpret the add-ons appropriately. Players that do have add-ons and are having like a bad UI setup or
Right, so add-ons, that's another different discussion, right? But it all goes together. I understand how he's tying that in with like a complicated spec that requires add-ons or whatever. But yeah, that's a different discussion right there. If people over-optimize in classic and it's way more punishing effects that aren't meta, yeah, I feel like you actually probably have more room to kind of like express yourself with your class in modern WoW, which I like.
or a lot of like issues.
Parsing in classic nodes bar, yeah.
Too many buffs or tracking the wrong things. And then over here, you're having players who are brand new to the game have to learn how to experience the content itself, the raids, the dungeons, the PvP, what the heck crowd control is and DRs are, right? They have to experience all of that without being able to interpret the information because there's 50 million different add-ons that you have. And trying to get somebody in a new player in 2024 from this part to all the way over here feels like it's gotten wider and wider and wider than ever.
I think something that's important is just somehow letting those new players know that it's worth it. That's the thing, because I think that something having like a lot of work required to succeed at isn't a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. You just need to know that it's worth it to put your time into it, right? And so if you have the game be fun from the learning kind of noob phase, and then you have like some cool things to look up to, and you have it like piece by piece have like an idea of how you go from being a noob to being like higher end stuff, that's good because you can see the progression, and understanding that it's worth it is sick too. Like, just like, you know, I always have the anecdote of like sitting in town and seeing somebody with like sick raid gear, like, whoa, that's awesome. Or like seeing a glad map, like, whoa, that's awesome, I want to get there. But I guess that also comes down to like people's mindsets of how they approach their gaming, right? Because I like to set goals, I like to work on things, I like to progress, and so games like WoW are really good for me because there's a substantial like grind to get your character strong, and there's also a substantial grind to like learn and get good, and it takes a lot of practice. But it's rewarding because then you can sort of like, you know, measure up against other people with your ratings, or just like your skill, you know, playing the game and doing well in arena feels really, really good to me. I like grind, I like competition, and so it's a good fit, but I think you do have to find a way to make new players understand that it's worth it to get there, right?
But of course, everybody does want to be sweaty. Everybody does want to make sure they complete the content. Asmongold, like we mentioned, said that himself. So where is it that Blizzard's actually going to be able to do something productive? I don't think it's getting rid of add-ons in its entirety, but I do think that the more that they add on lots and lots of class-specific buffs, the more it's pushing players, and it's pushing this gap between players to be wider than it is ordinarily.
I do think that a big divider in PvP is probably how much, like, you know, add-ons and weakauras you use to be given information, but at the same time, like, you have to be able to like practice to be able to interpret that information too. So I don't know, weakauras are pretty OP, that's for dang sure, and that's why I do see what he's saying with that one. I don't think I'd want add-ons disabled because I like changing the way my UI looks, right? And I do like how information is presented to me, and even just coming back from taking like a break to play other games and then coming back to WoW Arena, it takes a second to like even get used to the information that my own UI that I've customized is giving to me. It's like, whoa, gotta make sense of all this stuff.
One of the good things about borrowed power systems in the past was that eventually you got rid of them and they were replaced by something new. While there were tons of problems with the acquisition, I think the general idea of like, here you have this power, okay,
I love corruption.
Carry forward
that was so fun.
Expansion with you, here's a new power to replace it, so you're not just like constantly perma bloated all the time. actually isn't bad. It's just the acquisition of like getting that for your main, getting that for your alts, just burn people out.
Yeah.
And I don't think that acquisition's necessarily gotten better with like the extra upgrade system that we have on hand, because it's still a pain in the ass to gear alts, but maybe that's a video for another.
I actually like the upgrade system, but then again, I don't really play a lot of alts either. But it's like, I don't know. Do you just want all your characters geared instantly? Then what? Then you don't have anything to do. Like, the progression is what's fun, in my opinion.
Time.
I like
At
getting
the
stronger.
moment, I am really of the opinion that the hero talents are not really heading in the direction I think the community wants and the community needs to be able to actually welcome in new players into a new expansion, adapt them and sort of onboard them into like how the game works, have them experience it and like wanting to get better, and, like, wanting to improve so that they can do their dungeons or do their raids with friends. And I think that Blizzard's doing a really massive disservice to themselves, because it just gets that much harder to get new blood in to the mix.
You're playing not even with Gladius? How do you track DRs? You just know? Interesting, though. Interesting.
Let me know what you guys think, if you agree or disagree, and maybe I'll have to have a whole video dedicated to borrowed power and how I think it actually is a good theoretical system. It was just badly executed because of how acquisition worked.
I agree the first part. I don't know about the acquisition part, but yeah, I think that having some cool mechanics to play with that don't stick with your character forever are actually pretty fun. But all right, good stuff, Jack. Good
Let me know
stuff,
what you guys
buddy.
think. Thanks so much for watching.
Make sure to get subbed up to him and give him a thumbs up.